I think the most important thing to take away is no matter what medium you were in, video, or you're a writer, or you're an animator, or you develop, at the end of the day, you need to take into account the learner and the business objective or the need for the learner and tell a story. And if you're using that medium, especially video, and not telling a story, you need to go back and rethink your approach, because you're going to lose the audience without story. And it's something we continuously push and try to affect our people, our employees at Cinécraft in a positive way to make sure that whatever they're creating includes story. It is the most important part of, I think, our trade and what we bring to the table. So.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are and wherever you're watching from. Today on the Visual Lounge, we're going to be talking about the evolution of video, because video is not a new thing. In fact, I've heard for many, many years that it's been the year of video. And of course, we've seen a lot of changes in the last decade or two, and we're not done. There's many more to come, and so that will be really an interesting thing we can talk about, but we can also talk about some of that history, and because there's a rich history, and we want to get into that. So let me go ahead and introduce our guest today, and so we can dive into things. Dan Keckan is the CEO of Cinécraft Productions, a boutique learning agency specializing in the creation of engaging custom content for nearly 90 years. Dan got a start mopping floors for his family business 30 years ago, and today leads a team of video producers, instructional designers, animators, and programmer that produces award-winning work for the many Fortune 1000 companies. And with that said, please help me welcome Dan to the Visual Lounge. Hey, Dan.
Hi, Matt.
Hey, thank you so much for joining me today. And we're gonna dive in with our first question. Then we've got lots to talk about in terms of evolution of video. So, Dan, what's one tip that you would give to my audience about using images or video better in their work?
One tip, think about telling a story. Ultimately, when you are using video in your work, to create video doesn't do a lot of good. But if you create video to tell a story, and that story is compelling and engaging, then you're going to see the intended effect from that. So I would say think of video as a medium to tell your story. I was just reading an article that we were writing for a publication, and the article was very matter of fact. It had a lot of information in it, and at the end of the day, reading this article kind of bored me. And I even though I had all the right content and information, it didn't tell a story. And so we had to go back to the drawing board and rewrite it with some engagement, some story involved, so that people could relate to it and then be affected by the article. So whether it doesn't matter the medium, whether it's an article or video, the story is the most important part of that.
Dan, I appreciate that answer, because I do think that story is so vital in everything that we do. I think it's a great way to help people learn. It's a great way to engage people, which that engagement then helps reinforce and tie people into learning. So let's talk about the evolution of video as it is. Give us some context for your company, because I know your company has this rich legacy of working in videos. What should we know about Cinécraft a little bit to help maybe set the stage here?
Well, a little history, I guess. History lesson would be good. Our company started in 1939. So we're one of the first training content development companies in the country doing film, video, now e-learning, AI, other types of applications, mediums. And so when we got started, our original owners were doing Gene Autry films in Hollywood. Came to Cleveland to be with their family and said, we could do this for industry. We could do it for the Department of Defense or GE Lighting. And so they innovated and they created a company that essentially told stories for business. And we're in a time now that the need to tell stories for business has not changed. The business goals of improving performance have not changed in almost 90 years of us being around. What has changed is those mediums, and some of those mediums. You still have moving pictures, but it's in a different format, high definition, and that is no longer a passive medium. It is now a medium that is active and allows the learner to role play and act as though they are talking to an actual individual, whether it be a coach or a customer or a coworker, and they can practice behaviors and be provided with feedback, not just canned feedback, but now with artificial intelligence, we can provide authentic feedback that is more realistic, as though it were a coach, an actual person giving that feedback. So it has evolved tremendously, but the need to tell a story to improve performance has not changed.
So, I mean, super, super fascinating to see that legacy translate into kind of modern tech, right? The fact that you can do all these things, whether it's using AI or whatever else is coming in here. I'm curious though, as the tech, and I know you're not the technical guy, you're not the guy that's putting together the videos behind the camera, but as that's changed, how has that changed maybe the approach that you and your organization take to the story? Does that open up different avenues? Is it somehow the same, or is it evolved because of the advancement of some of these other technologies?
The design and development process, ultimately at its core, has not changed. So developing it hasn't changed. It's still a fairly waterfall based process to create. There are times when we get a little more agile, especially with gamification, but it's ultimately a fairly, um, you know, rigorous process that starts with a needs analysis, goes to storyboarding and scripting, um, gets on to development of your assets, and then programming them together into some form, and then implementing them and following up on results. So, I mean, it follows Addy pretty well, uh, you know, 90 years ago, and it follows Addy pretty well now. So the process is the same. The end result has changed, as I said. No longer are you watching a passive video. We used to do films for GE Lighting back in the 30s and 40s, 1930s and 40s, just to be clear, on how light gets to your home. So people would get all dolled up on a Friday night and go to the movie theater and watch how light gets to your home. And we would produce those films for GE Lighting. They'd sit there for an hour watching that very passive medium, and things have changed. It's now an active medium, and it changes behavior. And so I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. And I want to kind of follow up with this, that because that's so fascinating about the GE lighting films, and that I mean, it's obviously an educational style film. It's going to help people understand, the whole process. I'm curious, and you've been with Cinécraft for a number of years. The process looks the same, but how are you thinking about the learners differently? And I guess it's really a two-part question. We'll start with the first one. So how has that changed for how you approach, learners? Because you're saying like right now it's more active. I imagine most people in your audience that you might be talking to aren't going to sit for an hour to watch a film about how lighting gets to your home. First of all, topically, probably not relevant, but two, that's a pretty long, involved production. So I'm curious about one, how are you approaching learners maybe differently? And two, are we'll look at kind of the future, but let's kind of what we think where it's going to go. So how has that changed for you currently for your learners?
That's a good question. So because it's no longer passive, we believe in scenario-based learning. There is a time and place for knowledge acquisition, but a lot of the training that we engage in creating and developing is scenario-based in nature, so that those scenarios drive the learning. and that's a different way of looking at it. In the past, you'd watch a lecture, listen to a lecture in an e-learning format. Back in the day, with CD-ROM or laser disc. Now, now what we try to do is create, micro learning opportunities. I hate micro learning. I hate trends, but we create small learning objects that are deployed, wherever within an organization, and those objects have a scenario, a story that's authentic and real, and it drives the learning. So based on how they do in that scenario or situation, as Dr. Menez used to talk about situations. So we create uh, stories or scenarios that really drive the learning. And so instead of lecture up front, what we try to do is have the scenario drive, allow the learner to engage in the scenario, and then provide feedback. And that feedback is what provides the information, the content, as opposed to your traditional tell, show, do, review. We like to do first and then allow the learner to learn through feedback.
I love that. And I love that you're adjusting and adapting to kind of modern circumstances. If that kind of secondary question was kind of looking ahead pull out your crystal ball, best guesses. You don't have to be right. You don't have to be certain. But what do you think will continue to change, particularly because it feels like, at least from where I'm sitting, technology is evolving rapidly in terms of like with AI in particular, right? Obviously, tons of things are happening there. What do you think will be true about how you'll approach the learner from your creations going, in maybe the next, let's say 3 to 5 years, if we could put a time range on it?
Well, I think, the increase of development with generative AI is going to play a large role in how we deliver video. Number one, from the personalization of video and the implementation of that in organizations, as well as chatbots and more authentic feedback. So that feedback I talked about a few minutes ago with scenarios, having that feedback be more authentic, as if you have a virtual coach. Right now, most of those responses are canned, and in the future, they'll be less canned and they'll be more authentic and real. So we are, just launched our first generative AI project, where we had scenarios that had feedback generated using Microsoft or OpenAI, housed in Microsoft Azure. And so those responses are very authentic to Retail Associates, which is our hardware retailer, which is a client of ours.
Oh, it sounds super interesting and cool that you're able to do that. But it does seem like, yeah, the future, obviously a lot we don't know at this point, but it does seem like having those authentic responses, that interactivity, kind of ability for someone to not just be passive feels like a
Yeah,
really
personalization, allowing the learning to kind of take the learner to take control of their own destiny with their learning. But it's going to be slow going. I mean, the technology will be there, but I think organizations are going to be slow to adopt for security reasons, and so so it'll take some time.
Yeah. So it sounds like in your organization, projects you guys are working on is obviously covering a wide variety of technologies. You're not just 100% making videos, but it does sound like that's still a crux of kind of the core of what you're doing, right? Is using video to tell the story and then integrating it into these other parts and pieces, or bringing them into it, so you're creating these greater experiences. When we think about the role that video plays, and that how much do you think that will continue to change? Like you said earlier, the things that the founders of your company were doing in the 30s and 40s is very similar to the things that you're doing today. Obviously changing mediums, high definition technologies, things like that. But do you think that will continue to be true about video in the future, or do we think we'll see some kind of divestment into other technologies? I know, I hear about people talking about AR, VR, and that's kind of video-ish, but maybe not. So I'm curious on your thoughts.
Yeah, I see. There's so many things that are just beyond my level of comprehension that I hear about every day. One of which is I saw that authoring tools and other types of tools at some point like will be able to be created by the learner. So that means content essentially will be um, generated through OpenAI or generative AI for the learner to do themselves, and as opposed to opening up Storyline and creating a course, all of it will be done in some sort of generative AI fashion. I just can't fathom that, and I don't think it's anytime soon. But that um, begs my question as to how will that affect the development of video as well. So we have a task force at Cinécraft where all our editors, all our animators, um, graphic designers, developers, instructional designers each have a performance competency, I guess, that we look at as to how is AI going to affect your job now and in the future. And so they need to stay on top of that. And right now, there's things that are happening in terms of stock imagery, stock animations, models, voiceover. These are things that we're using on a regular basis to help make our process more simple and cost effective for the client. But where that ends up and how much is going to be done by generative AI as opposed to a creative editor in the future, I don't know. I really hope that there's always going to be a place for us, and I think there will be a place for us. But I think it'll be changing to the effect that creative editors are going to have to learn how to use generative AI as their tool, as their editing tool to support their creative efforts. So that's pretty far down the road, but that's what I see.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to deny, at least from what we're seeing here at the beginning of 2025, is that AI is not going to impact. Like, there's no way it's not going to impact what is coming, right? Like from a video perspective, from an editing perspective, and I think what you said there about I love that you're looking at that with your staff already. Like, hey, what are the things that could be impacted? What are the things you need skill sets? Because I do see and the hope, the dream is that what the generative AI does is make the things that are tedious and hard and just kind of I hate I hate doing this part, makes that streamless and easy. That's the dream. Like I think
Yeah.
about in my own editing, right? Like just cutting out the dead space. I can do it all day long, but should I have
Tedious.
to? Yeah.
Yeah, right.
So, Dan, I guess we've talked a lot about kind of where things are going. We've talked about your company. Before we get into our speed round and things like that, I do have a question. I don't know if you'll have a good answer, but obviously you've got this company, long history of making videos. Is there one video that you've seen in that archive? I'm guessing you haven't seen them all, but is there something that you've go back to and say that was a great piece of work, and whether it gives you inspiration or just you just love it because of what it is there something that you guys hold on to as man, this was awesome? And it could be relatively recent. It could be one of the early ones too.
Well, I have favorites in different categories. So, I guess my favorite, probably one of the favorite things I've been a part of was we did a e-learning course for Ace Hardware 15 years ago on their sales process, and it was scenario based, and it was really a great program. And I to this, it was Brandon Hall Award winner, and it had we used Second City talent, so we used some really funny people that could enhance the learning through poor customer service scenarios that could entertain the audience and the learners. And that was a really fun project. And, years later, I still remember it. So that certainly was a great project in my past.
Yeah, I love when people can do humor, but not everybody can do humor. And I know that about myself. I can't do humor. So
No.
I'm sure that was a lot of fun having those Second City
Yeah,
actors.
they were really funny. They were great. So,
Well, that's awesome. Well, Dan, we're going to move into our speed round. And so for people who have maybe not listened to the show before, speed round are quick questions, quick answers determined by the roll of a dice. So I'm going to play a little stinger here to get us transitioned over to that. So here we go. All right, so switching to the dice cam, we got our 12-sided die. Here comes our first question. That is question number 8. Obviously, you work in a creative space. Dan, you and your team are always thinking about these stories to tell, how to tell them creatively. Where's one place you regularly turn for inspiration? Could be anywhere, for get new ideas, get new thoughts. Any place in specific?
Absolutely. I mean, YouTube. I mean, I YouTube and what do you call that? Vimeo. Sorry,
Yep.
couldn't think of the name. YouTube and Vimeo has just whenever I need inspiration, I type in search terms around what I'm thinking about, and usually my inspiration comes really early in the process in the needs analysis of a project, and I'm trying to come up with ideas that will help to tell the story in a more creative fashion. That's kind of where I participate. So that's where my inspiration comes from, is other videos that people have done, other ideas people have come up with, and I try to take those and build upon them.
Yeah, I love that. And great places to go and look. So some amazing people are doing amazing work out there for sure. So, all right, here's our next question. It is a 6. You can tell by where the dot is. What's a piece of advice that you've received that's had lasting impact on you? It could be about work. It could be something just in general. So what's a piece of advice?
That's a tough one. I've had a lot of pieces of advice over the years. I've worked for my parents for 22 years, and I got a lot of advice from them. And really, ultimately, probably the one I take things to heart quite often. I'm very passionate about Cinécraft. I'm passionate about the industry. I'm passionate about our employees and care about them. And it's hard for me to let things go. And so what I was taught by my parents was to essentially, let things go. Don't hold on to things, and move on so that it doesn't slow you down. So that's probably number one.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. All right, one more question, Dan. Here we go. Let's hope it's not a repeat. Oh, question number 4. I like this one. What's your guilty pleasure or song or movie that you just secretly love that you're willing to share with us? Because you might be like, it's obviously secret for a reason, but is there a guilty pleasure song or movie that you go back to over and over?
Song or movie? Well, songs. I love music, and I rotate between a lot of different genres, and heavy metal, alternative, rap, classic rock. So I'm constantly rotating. Probably not a lot of people know that I really enjoy Wu-Tang Clan. So probably Protect Your Neck would be my guilty pleasure.
All right. All right. I'll have to remember that next time we'll jam out or something. Well, Dan, this has been an absolute pleasure just to talk with you. Appreciate always getting to see you, your contributions to the industry. Obviously, what you do with video and media is awesome work. So if people want to connect with you or they want to work with you perhaps in Cinécraft, how should they find you?
Cinécraft.com. Give us a call or email us. Info@cinécraft.com is our email on our website. And funny enough, that actually goes right to my email. And I have my phone on me 24/7. So it's rare that people don't hear from me within the hour. So I'm really easy to get a hold of, except for when I'm recording a hockey game or a basketball game. And for my kids, that's about the only time I'm not easy to get a hold of.
which is great that you take time for that, because that's awesome.
I have a work-life balance, Matt. There is no
Good.
doubt about it.
As we all should strive to as well. Well, Dan, as we wrap up the show, we like to ask our guests all the same question. So, Dan, what is your final take from today's show?
I think the most important thing to take away is, no matter what medium you were in, video, or you're a writer, or you're an animator, or you develop, at the end of the day, you need to take into account the learner and the business objective, or the need for the learner, and tell a story. And if you're using that medium, especially video, and not telling the story, you need to go back and rethink your approach, because you're going to lose the audience without story. And it's something we continuously push and try to affect our people, our employees at Cinécraft, in a positive way to make sure that whatever they're creating includes story. It is the most important part of, I think, our trade and what we bring to the table. So.
Awesome. Well, Dan, thank you for joining me here in the Visual Lounge.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, go check out Cinécraft stuff. They really do have a long legacy of making video and doing great work, and well worth working with them if you have the opportunity. I'd encourage you to do that. And of course, if you want to connect with Dan. But if you want to connect with me here at the Visual Lounge at thevisuallounge@techsmith.com. Of course, you can find us on social media. We'd love to hear what you think. You got suggestions for shows, topics you want us to cover, all that stuff. And of course, if you want to give us a like or subscribe on any of the podcasting platforms or on YouTube, it helps people to find us. It helps us to make sure we're getting the message out there to people and making, helping you to be successful with the things you do. So, of course, our mantra here, you know what I'm going to say if you've listened to an entire show. We want you to get better. We want you to skill up. We want you to be able to use stories. We want you to be able to use videos. We want you to be able to use those mediums to help you accomplish the goals that you've set out for your organization or for yourself. And to do that, you need to make sure you take a little time to level up every single day. Thanks, everyone.